Hello, my lovelies. It's Andrea Edwards, and welcome back to part 2 of We Need a New Middle Class Dream. And this is section 8, where we're going to get stuck into the technology industry, as well as focusing on e-waste, which is, of course, electronic waste. This is a big, complicated one. I hope I do it justice. There's lots to cover. So let's get on with it. Technology and e-waste, two massive, massive topics. And I've tried very hard to keep this brief, while really honing in on the important issues, which of course aren't just environmental, but social, political, security, and a lot more. I've spent most of my life working in the technology industry, twice with or for Microsoft in different parts of the world, with IDC, the IT research company, although I do apologise to those guys for not including their data, but I can't really afford to use their data in this. I've also spent many years working with IBM employees across Asia, running social leadership programs for their employees. And I've worked with many, many other technology companies. So most of my career has been in technology. I love the technology industry. I've always been really inspired by the positive impact it can have on society, while also appreciating its downsides. And I've had an amazing career thanks to the opportunities I've been able to find in this really vital sector. I've made a lot of great friends too. However, today we have to come face to face with the challenges we face as a global society, especially what this industry is offering us. And we really need to ask the questions, can it keep going and growing the way it is today, as well as what's predicted into the future? Do you agree with me that it is time to step back, reflect, and ask some really hard questions? Can we see that the technology sector is now as entwined in our lives and economies as much as the fossil fuel sector is? I don't hear this spoken about much, because the other question, of course, is what does that mean? Number 2, can we see the risks technology poses to us? Not just socially, politically, or with regards to security, but environmentally too. Are we switched on to it? And number 3, is the direction we're going with technology in our best interests as a collective species? I believe it's long beyond time we ask these questions. I hope you agree. And I'm going to finish with these questions. All right, so let's start with the technology sector before moving into e-waste. So, what are the most valuable brands in the world right now? Here you go. Amazon and Apple often have a dance between 1 and 2, but in the top 10, we have 7 tech brands. If you include TikTok as a tech company, and in the world of technology, social media companies are considered technology companies. With that said, Tesla could be considered a technology company too, so we might actually have 8 out of the top 10 in the technology sector. But before we focus on today, let's go back 3.4 million years and understand how technology has evolved, as well as how quickly. So here you go. This is the visual representation of 3.4 million years of the evolution of technology and human development. This image maps from the first tools used by our ancestors, or ancestors of our species, and that starts in the middle of the spiral down the bottom where the star is. But obviously, there is no way you can see the detail on your screen, especially if you're looking at this on a mobile phone. So I've split it up. So here's the bottom half, and that's 3.4 million years ago to 1800. So throughout human history, technological changes were extremely slow, and this meant the technologies our ancestors used were central in their lives from birth through to death. Today, just think of all of the changes we've seen in our lives since we were born, just from a technology perspective. It's truly amazing what we have stood witness to, don't you think? But let's look at the past. As discussed already, 3.4 million years ago, in the center of the spiral, is where ancestors of our species are first known to have used tools. From there, each turn of the spiral represents 200,000 years of history, And it took 2.4 million years, so 12 turns of the spiral, for our ancestors to control fire and use it for cooking. After that, it was 60,000 years ago when we started using bows and arrows. The author then moves on to the last 12,000 years, and this is the point where the lines become zigzagged. And it's also the point where the agricultural revolution happened, which started about 10,000 BCE. This period illustrates technological advancement in agriculture, writing, and the invention of the wheel, which all happened very slowly, with several thousand years passing between just these three inventions. Moving to the top of the image, and this is when we get to 1800 onwards, and the style to represent technological progress has been straightened, showing how many major inventions started to rapidly follow the other. This technology covers many domains. An important example is communication, which went from writing to paper, to the printing press, to the telegraph, the telephone, the radio, all the way through to the internet and smartphones. I suppose we can add social media and AI today. Another example is the rapid development of human flight. In 1903, the Wright brothers took the first flight in human history. And even though they were only in the air for less than a minute, they still got that plane off the ground. But just 66 years later, we landed on the moon. Today, our skies are full of planes and we have commercial space flights. Other technological advancements represented here include extraordinarily beneficial innovations such as the smallpox vaccine, as well as terrible innovations like nuclear bombs. The red line reflecting the timeline reaches up to the present and then continues in green into the future. What can we expect on the green line? New vaccines, progress in clean, low carbon energy, better cancer treatments, as well as future innovations that could improve our living conditions and the environment around us. Although I have to say, I'm skeptical of that as a possibility. If we don't care for our environment and fix the harm we have done, no amount of technology is going to solve that. However, today, the dominant technology trend and where it's going is the big unknown, but we are at the beginning of the AI revolution, and it will bring extraordinary benefits to humankind as well as terrible outcomes. We just don't know yet, but with AI in the mix, the speed of technological development will be faster than at any other time in human history. So please do accept rapid acceleration now. We'll look at growth predictions for AI, but one message has become very clear, especially in recent months with the excitement around generative AI. We need to tread very carefully here, very, very carefully. We need rules and ethics wrapped around this technology before we can no longer apply any, because it is ultimately so much more intelligent than us that if we get it wrong, we'll be responsible for our own demise. We must remember that behind all technology are tech bros excited about technology, and I'm sure there's some tech gals too. Look, I know and love many of these people who are the people designing our world, but that other side, the human impact bit, it's never really on the agenda because it's not how their brains are wired. If you ever sit down with a developer, you'll really get this. They're amazing, but the holistic piece isn't there. They're just wired to create awesome stuff, and they're very proud of it. So let's let them do their work, but let's make sure they have ethics teams working alongside them. And they need to listen to each other too. For all of us who have no control over where this is going, please pay attention to both sides of the AI conversation. Don't just sit with the excitement of what it can do. Please, because there's a lot of detrimental aspects to this, and we're all going to experience this. 40% of white collar workers are going to lose their jobs very quickly because of AI. So, it's coming at us fast now, and we need to get prepared. We need to be ready, and we need to understand where this is all going in multiple ways. Because I'm all about tracking growth, I decided to dig into some numbers. And if you ask Google the question, how much did the tech industry grow from the year 2000 to 2024? You'll find that the answers are all over the place. And I use different browsers to do this. It's become just too big of an industry today, and it's also very segmented, from IoT to semiconductors to hardware, software, and on it goes. I'm sure the total data is out there somewhere. I just couldn't find anything that I thought was worth sharing here today. However, you might ask me the question, why didn't I ask AI, my ChatGPT account? I personally haven't found the responses great from AI so far, and I'm really good at searching. So that's another side. I do a lot of it. And I find a lot of the information misleading or even false. But the other thing is, I think it's unnecessary to use AI for something like this, as we'll soon learn, because it's very bad for the environment. And every search contributes to that impact. Let's get into growth in the technology industry, and let's start with the software market, which was estimated at 590 billion in 2022, and it's anticipated to reach around 1789 billion by 2032. In percentages, that's growth of 199% over that 10-year period. One trend in software development is for mobile devices, which of course makes sense. Mobile applications have become a crucial component of people's everyday lives as a result of the widespread use of smartphones and tablets. The expansion of mobile app development and the demand for software that supports mobile platforms are both results of this trend. Machine learning and artificial intelligence are two hot trends that are expected to see this sector surge in growth. Another big market is the public cloud market, and as anyone in the tech space knows, this has been around for a long time. It's had a lot of different challenges, but the global public cloud market reached 157 billion in 2021 and is dominated by 3 US-based firms that have seen their revenues grow at high double digits for years. The 3 firms are Google Cloud, Microsoft Azure, and of course the market leader, Amazon Web Services. IoT Analytics, the company responsible for this graph, ran 3 scenarios, which are illustrated here, and believe one path has the best potential and will see a 2 trillion public cloud market in the foreseeable future, which is over a 10 to 20-year period. So you can see that base scenario there in the middle. Another proxy to consider is that today's IT enterprise spending amounts to roughly $4 trillion, or 4.4% of global GDP. Given the importance of data, information technology, and digitization, it is not unimaginable that the share of IT enterprise spending to global GDP would more than double to 10% by 2040, which would translate to 15 trillion in IT spending in 2040, assuming a global GDP growth of 3%. A 2 trillion spend on public cloud seems almost small in comparison, though 10 trillion appears quite large. Another side of tech is how it's exploded across sectors and industries, all with their own names. I remember when this first started, but if you're not in the tech industry, you might not be aware of it. So let's just run through a few of them. So one of the first to arrive was InsurTech, which is technology for the insurance sector, and it's expected to hit 152 billion by 2030. FinTech, another early arrival, was valued at 134 billion in 2022 and is expected to reach 557 billion by 2030. AdTech, so this is advertising technology. So when you're getting blasted with all those ads, it's the technology behind it that's delivering them to you. So it's a $839 billion industry, just the tech aspect, in 2023, and has an estimated CAGR above 14% between 2024 to 2032. That means the ads are not just going to keep coming, they're going to keep growing. MarTech, which is technology for marketing, was valued at 326 billion in 2022 and has an expected CAGR of 19.8% between 2023 and 2030, and that's a very high growth rate. All right, let's move on to AgTech. And so this is agricultural technology, which helps farmers grow or raise our food. And it was valued at $18 billion in 2021 It's expected to reach $43 billion by 2030. Now, if you want to understand the craziness of the world, right? So 839 billion on ad tech, 18 billion on ag tech. Seems where our priorities are, right? These are the people that grow our food, helping them be successful, especially in the world that we live in today. I think it needs a little bit more funding, don't you? Prop tech, that was a new one for me. I hadn't come across it before. It's technology for the property sector, was valued at 34 billion in 2023 and is expected to grow to 90 billion by 2032. If you have kids in school, EdTech or technology for education was valued at 137 billion and is expected to reach 345 billion by 2030. And the final one is religion tech. Yes, religion has technology too. So do we call it rel tech? It was worth 44 billion in 2020 and is estimated to have a CAGR of 10% between 2022 and 2027. The reason I'm showing you this is to illustrate the complexity of the technology industry. It used to be a lot simpler, but over the last decade in particular, every sector is moving forward with technology specifically in alignment with its unique needs. So getting a big picture perspective of the technology industry is not so easy anymore. One of the things that has become very clear as I've been doing research for this is that the technology industry is now an industry feeling very optimistic after a challenging 2023, as we can see in this report from Deloitte. So leaders in the technology sector identified the technologies they expect to enable the most growth for the industry this year. And number one is artificial intelligence, followed by cloud computing, cybersecurity, advanced connectivity, and generative artificial intelligence. Together, AI and generative AI made up 60% of survey answers. So no question about it, we are in the AI revolution, and generative AI is the stuff we're using. So ChatGPT, Bard, and those things like DALL-E. So that's what that stands for. However, the surging popularity of AI seems to be driving a cycle of growth for the industry as a whole, because increased AI adoption means investment in cloud, connectivity, and infrastructure modernization. The other side of this is IT environments are growing more complex, which gives rise to new potential attack vectors. So cybersecurity spending increases concurrently too. A good year ahead for tech, maybe even a decade. So if you've lost your job in the technology industry last year, maybe things aren't looking so bleak as we move forward. In regards to AI, what does that growth look like in numbers? Well, here you go. According to Bloomberg Intelligence, a new report finds that the emerging industry could grow at a CAGR of 42% over the next 10 years. So we've been seeing a lot of the use of CAGR in the predictions throughout this whole section, whole of part two. And you'll probably notice that most sort of sit in the 4 to 8% mark. And that's sort of the year-on-year growth. Go and look it up. I encourage people to educate themselves. 8% sort of is pretty high, but anything over that is very high. 42%, absolutely and utterly bonkers. To illustrate overall growth in AI, just a mere 1,204%. According to this report, with the influx of consumer generative AI programs like Google's Bard and OpenAI's ChatGPT, the generative AI market is poised to explode, growing to 1.3 trillion over the next 10 years from a market size of just 40 billion in 2022. That's massive growth. Moreover, rising demand for generative AI products could add about 280 billion of new software revenue driven by specialized assistants, new infrastructure products, and co-pilots that accelerate coding. Companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and NVIDIA could be the biggest beneficiaries as enterprises shift more workloads to the public cloud. And remember, we were talking about public cloud just a few slides ago. So that's why I wanted to include it, because it's very, very important. But, is any of this good for us and our environment? And that has to be the priority question we ask with anything coming to market. especially as AI will so quickly dominate all of our lives. AI has many challenges, but let's focus on the environment. And point one, it is an energy guzzler. It's got an insatiable appetite for energy. I can't tell you how ironic it felt reading this article discussing all the top technology leaders attending the 2024 CERAWeek event in Houston, which is the fossil fuel industry's flagship conference. The tech industry is one of the industries that has worked hard to raise awareness and act on climate change. And here they are attending a very important fossil fuel event. Why? Because you need massive amounts of energy to run AI. According to this article, it isn't clear how much electricity will be required to power an exponential increase in data centers worldwide, but the data centers needed to advance AI will require so much power they could strain the grid and thwart the transition to cleaner energy sources. In the tech industry, what no one can answer is where this energy is going to come from. Utility companies have no idea how to meet this level of demand. And to get close, utilities will have to lean more heavily on natural gas, coal, and nuclear plants, and perhaps support the construction of new gas plants to help meet spikes in demand. Sustainable energy isn't going to cut it. So if we want AI, we will get more emissions, and it's going to be added rapidly by all accounts. We've just heard the news that it was the hottest March, preceded by the hottest February, preceded by the hottest January, and on it goes. Right now, we don't actually know if the world's climate has moved into a new regime. We should know for sure by August if land and sea temperatures don't go down. So the idea we can have an explosion of AI and all it entails sounds like the craziest thing I've heard so far. And I'm surprised it's coming from the technology industry. We've seen the escalation in our environment. We can have AI or a chance at a future, but at this point, just my opinion, I don't think that we can have both. Back to the environmental impact of AI and generative AI. The electricity demand of AI threatens emissions targets because the scale of energy required to run AI will mean emissions targets have very little chance of being met, and we could exceed them much faster now. For AI, gas is earmarked to meet this demand, and both nuclear and coal are on the table too, as I discussed from the Wall Street Journal article. Coal is the dirtiest fossil fuel, and nuclear is slow to market. So gas is the best option here. And even though there has been a lot of greenwashing about gas, it is contributing massively to the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. It is definitely not a green fuel. Data centers, AI, and crypto are all expected to double by 2026. Although in the crypto field, I am seeing lots of really interesting stuff. Like they're trying to capture the emissions from landfill to run their data centers or crypto centers. I'm not sure what you call them actually, but that's good. But anyway, doubling within 2 years. We're at the very beginning of the AI revolution, and it's already using the energy equivalent of a small country. And that energy will now grow exponentially. As we saw, it's going to double by 2026. And we haven't even talked about water, and water matters, especially because it cools the data centers. A lot of the data centers around the world are being built in areas with water shortages, and in poorer nations, water is being used on data centers, and the people in those communities are secondary. Their water needs are not being met, and that means they're going thirsty and hungry because they can't water their crops, but the data centers are still being cooled. Interestingly, just as I was about to go to record this video, this article popped up in my feed. In the Pacific Northwest, which includes Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington, the energy needs of AI is not a future problem, it's a now problem. A direct quote from the piece: "The challenges facing the Northwest are all exacerbated by the region's new energy hog data centers, which makes the demands of the now defunct Northwest aluminium industry look dainty by comparison." The Northwest is going to need 4,000 megawatts of additional generation just to keep pace with power generation over the next 5 years, and this is not a quick fix. So the challenge is already here. Will the powers that be prioritise the people and local businesses, or will it suffer from this excessive need to power the data centres that are powering AI? Suppose we wait and see what the answer to that question is. So just a few thoughts. AI makes business more effective, but not all usage is good for us. So just one example. In 2019, Microsoft announced a partnership with ExxonMobil and stated that the company would use Microsoft's cloud computing platform Azure. The oil giant claimed that by using the technology, which relies on AI for certain tasks, such as performance analysis, it could optimize mining operations and, by 2025, increase production by 50,000 oil equivalent barrels per day. So in this case, Microsoft's AI is directly used to add more fossil fuels, which will release greenhouse gases when burned to the market. Just the training of ChatGPT produced 500 tons of CO2. And so for those who don't know, to get an artificial intelligence tool like a generative AI tool onto the market, it needs to have a lot of data put into it so that it actually has output. So one of the areas with the fastest growing demand for energy is the form of machine learning called generative AI, which requires a lot of energy for training and a lot of energy for producing answers to queries. Training a large language model like OpenAI's ChatGPT-3, for example, uses nearly 1,300 megawatt hours of electricity, the annual consumption of about 130 US homes. That doesn't sound like too much, but everything adds up. Every bit of data we use, save, or generate has a real world cost, and I don't think we're switched on to this. According to the IEA, a single Google search takes 0.3 watt hours of electricity, while a ChatGPT request takes 2.9 watt hours. If ChatGPT were integrated into the 9 billion searches done each day, the IEA says the electricity demand would increase by 10 terawatt hours a year, and that's the amount consumed by about 1.5 million European Union residents. Even before AI, we had an issue with emissions from our personal tech use, where even emails are an issue. Over the course of a year, a person's average email usage varies between 3 to 40 kilograms of CO2, and that's the equivalent of driving between 10 to 128 miles in a small petrol car. So the individual contribution of emails to global emissions might sound like it's very, very small, but when magnified across the world's 3.9 billion email users, that's still quite a sizable chunk of carbon. So final thought, can we focus on real needs for human flourishing and stop its use elsewhere? So think of the Exxon example, which certainly does not serve the greater good in bringing down emissions. It's a classic business as usual path, and we must turn from this direction urgently. So why not allow AI to flourish in all the ways that it can do good in the world, helping with identifying the best priorities for ecological transformation, tackling the rising cost of food security as countries across the world are seeing their crops fail, addressing inequality and coming up with solutions that will make us all more equal. Medical progress, of course, is important too. So why don't we just focus on the good stuff for now while we sort out how to feed this energy-hungry machine. I hope we can all agree these examples I shared are good, but finding more fossil fuels to burn, not so much, right? Beyond AI, the impact of climate change on the technology industry is vast, and we are not prepared. Thirsty data centers are at risk due to water shortages, and this is happening in continents across the world. The recent earthquake in Taiwan impacted the semiconductor industry, but the semiconductor industry is also impacted by water shortages. Where the facilities to make these important devices exist, the long-term ability of the environment to support the technology while not taking away from the people or local agriculture is going to be critical, and we need to be mapping that out now. Last year, It was identified that Apple has a massive risk due to climate change in its supply chain, and this is according to Bloomberg. The belt of the planet where natural disasters will intensify most rapidly due to climate change is precisely the one where the iPhone maker has built its manufacturing footprint. And this is factories in areas that will be hit by extreme weather, like flooding, extreme heat, and beyond. It needs to make sure it's ready and has adapted to these risks. It's well behind here, as are most companies. AI is going to cause an explosion in hardware, and companies are getting ready for the mining boom times, but at what cost to the earth? All of these rare and precious metals have to come from somewhere. And the final point, supply chains are at risk too. We're seeing this risk due to geopolitics, the Suez Canal, climate change, the Panama Canal, and because of the excessive distribution of fast fashion, predominantly from China to the US and Europe, that is also impacting supply chains. So we've got to tackle this head on and diversify the risk, or we'll wake up one day to its impact, which is growing every day. And the people being impacted the most right now are the poor, but it's getting more expensive for all of us. And at some point, the things that we take for granted will no longer be available. These are just some of the issues impacting the technology industry, as well as the issues created by this industry. There is much more to be said, but let's move on to e-waste, the hardware impact of the technology industry. So what is e-waste? Well, it includes discarded products that have a plug or a battery and typically contains toxic and dangerous substances such as beryllium, cadmium, mercury, and lead. All of these are carcinogens. Some examples of e-waste, of course, we've got phones, laptops, desktops, tablets, screens and monitors, televisions, video recorders, DVD players. And while some of this technology is old, it's still sitting in our environment somewhere today. Gaming consoles and accessories, including VR headsets, fitness trackers, digital watches. I have to just tell you a secret. My husband uses one of these, but for me, it's one of the areas that I've never been able to get behind. The idea that we live in a society where we have to count our steps to make sure that we've done enough to be healthy, it kind of feels like everything that's wrong in our world. Just my opinion. Fridges, freezers, coffee machines, toasters, kettles, washing machines, dishwashers, photocopiers, printers, vacuum cleaners, including vacuum robots, microwaves, electronic toys, radios, heating or cooling devices. I've got a neck air conditioning device, and it really did save me the other day when the electricity went out when we were sitting way up in the high temperature bracket, because we're going through the hot season now and it's extremely hot. My neck device will at some point potentially be e-waste, so I have to make sure that it doesn't end up in landfill. Pet trackers, which we talked about when we did pets and climate change, baby monitors, cameras, drones, and e-cigarettes. And I'll show you an example of this in a moment. When it comes to e-waste in landfills, it's far more likely that e-waste will pollute the environment rather than biodegrading. Toxic e-waste compounds get into the soil, and if they are burned, which they often are, they get into the air. Some examples of the negative effects of e-waste in landfills: aluminium, which is in computer sheathing, causes disfiguring rashes. Lead in LCD display screens causes vomiting, convulsions, and sometimes death with acute exposure. Mercury in printed wiring boards causes tremors, kidney damage, memory relapses, and central nervous system damage if it's ingested or inhaled. And remember, the people who are being impacted by this are the poorest people in our societies. The volume of electronic waste generated worldwide in 2019 was roughly 54 million metric tonnes, a trend that is expected to continue, with projections showing that by 2030, annual e-waste generation worldwide will have increased by 75 billion tonnes, or by 39%. However, this still feels too conservative for me. So to further expand on the numbers, in a recent report on CNN, titled Electronic Waste Has Grown to Record Levels. Here's why that's a huge problem. So number one, global e-waste has reached record highs and is growing 5 times faster than rates of recycling. This brings a host of health, environmental, and climate problems. And the numbers are truly staggering. In 2022, the world generated 62 million metric tons of e-waste. This waste could fill more than 1.5 million 40 metric ton trucks, which, if placed bumper to bumper, could form a line long enough to wrap around the equator. Great job, humans. Number 3, global e-waste in 2022 was up 82% compared to 2010 and is on track to rise a further 32% to reach 82 million metric tons in 2030, so 7 billion tons more than the Statista report. Number 4, recycling capacity is not keeping pace. Less than a quarter of e-waste, 22.3%, produced in 2022 was documented as collected and recycled. Since 2010, the growth of e-waste has outpaced the growth of formal collection and recycling by a factor of almost 5. Most e-waste ends up in landfills or is part of informal recycling systems where the risks of pollution and harmful health impacts are very high. Small electronic gadgets such as toys, vacuum cleaners, and e-cigarettes had particularly low recycling rates at around 12%, despite making up roughly a third of all e-waste. 6, as the gap between e-waste generation and recycling capacity continues to grow, collection and recycling rates will decrease to 20% in 2030. So we're going backwards here. We're making more and more, but we are recycling less. This needs to be a global priority. I know that we all agree on that. Number 7, results of this report reveal that manufacturers are showing a lack of duty of care. By failing to take accountability for what happens to their products at the end of their life. And this is not just the technology industry. This is right across the board. There is no duty of care. They produce, they sell, they ship, and they do not do anything to make sure that those products don't get trashed in our environment where they just do so much harm, not just to humans, but to all life on Earth. To me, this is one of the craziest things that we're doing to ourselves, and we're doing a lot of crazy things to ourselves. Let's look at the human and environmental impacts of e-waste, and this is the people who are being impacted by it. So there are more than 18 million children and adolescents, some as young as 5, engaged in this informal sector. This is colonialism just in another form. We don't care about their kids as long as we have the latest tech. Sorry, I'm a bit passionate about this one because I live in a country where these people are part of my community and we have to start caring for them. Others live, go to school and play near e-waste recycling centres where high lead and mercury levels can damage their intellectual abilities, so they don't ever have a chance at a better life. How happy would any of us be if our children were exposed to these sort of recycling centres? And then again, do you know where these recycling centres are in your own country, and are they leaching these poisons into your environment and you're not being informed? Probably worth finding out, right? The workers who are aiming to recover materials such as copper and gold risk exposure to over 1,000 harmful substances, including lead, mercury, nickel, brominated flame retardants, and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. We're doing a great job. Most e-waste is illegally dumped, overwhelmingly in low or middle income countries. This is always one of the aspects that drives me really, really crazy because, as I said, I live in one of those countries and the people suffering this do not deserve it. Many of them have no technology at all, and yet they suffer from our excessive consumption of it. It is time that we address this. If we don't address inequality and all that entails, we cannot overcome and build a better world. And there's huge value in recycling this e-waste, both financially and environmentally. We need to be mining e-waste, not our pristine land, rivers, and oceans. Who is going to lead this? We'd expect the technology industry to do it, right? But, they might say, but we're not mining companies. But, someone's got to lead this. And I think they're the best place to do it. They know what's inside these devices and how valuable it ultimately is. Whoever does it, we have to make sure that it's done in a way that the poorest don't suffer by having their environment poisoned by the factories who are doing this work. So we need to make sure that they do it in a way that leaves a clean environment behind. But we need to get on top of this all over the world. We need to get on top of this. This is beyond urgent. Rather than mining the bottoms of the oceans, why don't we just mine all of the devices that have already been produced and dumped? Right now, there are 6.84 billion smartphones and 16.8 billion mobile devices. In 2 years, it will be 7.3 billion smartphones and 18.22 billion mobile devices. So we're not even talking about one device for 3.8 billion middle-class people here. We're talking about worldwide access to technology by everyone, because if you don't at least have a phone today, how can you succeed with your education, your work, and how can you stay informed on the big issues that are impacting you wherever you are in the world today? So the e-waste challenge isn't the story of 3.8 billion middle-class people. It's the story of the world's population at 8.1 billion. And for the middle class up, it's about 2 or more devices each. How many devices do you have? In front of me now, based on a plug or a battery, I can see 6 devices that would be considered e-waste. And then if I look more broadly across my family, our numbers would be very, very high indeed. Are you the same? E-waste is creating a nightmare, and we've really got to do something about it. The technology industry has to lead in solving this, but we've also got to accept our role in it, and we will need to understand that we have to accept to pay more for any of our devices if we stand a chance of getting it paid for. Cheap is not good. We have to move beyond cheap. High quality, high value, lasts for a long time. But overall, we need to get back to quality products that last and can be fixed. We need to move away from always having the latest versions, which is us getting sucked in by aspirational marketing. We need to use our technology for longer, much, much longer. And when it's worn out, it needs to enter a circular economy process and not be dumped back into the environment. And while we're at it, how the hell do we ever allow this to happen? And this is just the UK. Manufacturers across the board are showing a lack of duty of care. New products launched today should never be destined for landfill, especially when they contain so many precious metals, and as you can see here, are wrapped in plastic. We've got to clean up what's already happened, but we must also demand that no new products contribute to this problem, like we're seeing here with vapes. Please, if you're vaping, make sure you only buy from a company that is operating with full circularity. It might cost you more, but our children's future is worth that expense. So what are our options here? What do we need to be thinking about as far as comprehensive global change is concerned? What can businesses do to lead this change? So number one, the exponential rise of technology, specifically artificial intelligence, could push us over the edge due to its very, very high energy needs. So surely at this point in the escalation of environmental impacts, we get that we have life or we have AI, but it doesn't look like we can have both, not right now. Do we have the courage to pull back progress on artificial intelligence for now, focusing it just on where it can help humanity and nature flourish until the energy needs are addressed sustainably? We have a long way to go there, but are we willing to risk it all for AI? I think it's an important question we need to be asking ourselves. Another impact of AI is it will dramatically increase the demand in other areas of IT, including more hardware, which means more mining of precious metals and the destruction that causes, as well as more plastic, which obviously is an essential component in hardware. So it's not just the impact of AI directly, but all of the other impacts caused by the growth in sectors to help AI flourish. Number three, we need to secure our supply chains from climate change. We've seen the impact of the Panama Canal, which is due to climate change, and it doesn't look like it's being resolved anytime soon. But equally, Apple's whole supply chain is at risk from extreme weather events, as is the very essential semiconductor sector. We need to be adapting now, moving facilities now, protecting workers in these environments now. Number four, we need to protect developing nations from tech impacts like high water needs in drought or dry environments to cool data centers, the environmental pollution caused by e-waste, and slave labour in the mines or the factories across the developing world, which of course includes child labour. Number five, tech companies must be held to account and address the harm being caused. Having worked in the technology industry most of my life, this is an industry that knows how to get a message across. And over the decades, the big players were committed to doing the right thing, and they are often on the front lines when it comes to addressing the biggest issues like climate change. But it's not an innocent industry, and all those tech execs attending a fossil fuel industry event seeking energy options to power AI, which includes gas, nuclear, and coal. Well, are you true to your word? Will you really take us down this path, especially at this point for humanity? Aspirational marketing has to go, not just for technology, but across the entire consumer culture. It's a massive issue that we have in marketing. And this is the sort of marketing that makes you want to upgrade your phone or computer after 1 or 2 years so you've got the latest and you can be the coolest. We can't afford this sort of marketing anymore. Our e-waste problem is growing exponentially, and this is a huge part of the challenge that is creating it. So, companies, stop it. Number 7, the e-waste challenge needs to be solved globally. We have to address this challenge, and shipping it to poorer nations is certainly not going to cut it. Just like the world's general waste has been shipped to these countries for decades, we are all aware now that nothing stays over there. Once it enters the environment, especially the water, the impact and damage goes global. So it's beyond time we address this before it gets worse. And one solution is to set up factories around the world where robots sort the material from e-waste rather than humans being poisoned by doing it. And that material is used for new versions of technology. We're dumping billions of dollars of precious metals every year and then digging up new metals, which creates massive environmental damage and uses a lot of fossil fuels in its extraction. It's just nuts what we're doing. Recycling metals from e-waste, instead of extracting new raw materials, avoided approximately 52 million metric tons of planet warming emissions in 2022. We can and must do better, but it will cost us more, as it should. If you're in the tech industry, and I know many, many people working in the tech industry, please, let's get these issues at the highest levels in your organization and make sure that serious action is being taken. And if they're not going to do something about it, then be a whistleblower, because we need to get this out there in the open. But if there is one industry that can solve this crisis, I believe that it is the technology industry. So what can you and I do about all of this? Because we often feel like we can't do anything, but there's lots that we can do. So the first one is we need to get back to quality products that last and can be fixed. And that means old repair shops need to come back at scale everywhere. And that means we need to remember those skills that those shops used to have. It also requires the manufacturers to move away from making products that barely last until the warranty expires. And I've got a LG TV sitting in there that basically crashed out a day after the warranty expired. Or that products can be fixed outside of the tech ecosystem. And we saw Apple and the EU going about that. And we know that how we repair our devices is important because, of course, it can void the warranty. So that's an issue. But we've all got to buy the highest quality we can afford and avoid any cheap crap that will not last. Cheap stuff always costs more in the long term. However, I do appreciate that not everyone can afford the higher quality products up front. However, we have a clean environment or we don't, and manufacturers must commit to this quality while building a business that serves the whole world because technology is critical for people everywhere to be able to progress. Essentially, it's time for us to get the crap out of the system. Number 2, we need to move away from always having the latest versions and use anything we have for longer. Any devices that we have as a family needs to last at least 5 years, especially with phones, or longer if we can. And we also have a next destination for them. We're certainly imperfect, but we're trying very hard. We're also speaking to our children about how it's not important to have the very latest technology, and trying to help them understand that it just doesn't matter. Kids are obviously under an enormous peer pressure today about so many issues. So talk to them about e-waste and why it's important we don't make the problem any worse. When our technology is worn out, it needs to enter a circular economy and not be dumped back into the environment. So please come and co-create the circular economy with me. So what I do is I send my printers, printer cartridges, phones, and pretty much anything I use straight back to the manufacturer. I do that with other consumer products too. Especially with e-waste, please don't dump it in your rubbish bin, in the tip, or in landfill. Send it back to the manufacturer, and hopefully we can force them to start solving this challenge, because it's all going to end up on their doorstep. But of course, we need billions of people doing it before they're going to really get the message. Or millions will probably get the message across. Regardless of what happens, we all have a responsibility, and we must stop blindly trusting recycling schemes, which I see a lot of in Western countries. If you can do it, put a tracker on your device and see where it ends up. The chances are it's going to end up in a landfill in a developing part of the world, leaching its poisons into the local environment, which will impact the intellectual and physical development of children who don't even have access to technology. Number 4, clean up your digital footprint. So I was working at Microsoft when it announced all Microsoft 365 customers automatically had a terabyte of data. That was exciting news at the time. I don't know if you remember it. And then more recently, due to supply chain issues because of COVID, when I finally was able to upgrade my iPhone, I could only get a phone with a terabyte of data. While we think nothing of it, this data is on our devices and in the cloud, taking up a massive amount of space, and it has very high energy demands, which means it's creating emissions, and it's also using excess water in places running dry. We never used to be able to keep so much digital information back in the day. Do you remember floppy disks? Today, all of our devices are full of photos, videos, PowerPoints, and more going back decades, and there's a cost to it. So let's clean up our digital footprint and keep it as low as we possibly can. It does require time, especially the longer you've been around. We also need to convince companies to educate customers on storing less data for the betterment of the environment as well. So with things like email, like a really simple thing you can do is don't reply all. Make sure that there's only text in your email, so don't include photos, videos, or graphics in the body of your email. So if you're sending out regular emails to your clients using one of the apps that you can do that with, and it's full of visuals, that's going to be more data intensive than having it just text-based. The other issue is the reading rates of these sorts of emails, typically lower than 10%. So 90% are not being read, but you're still creating emissions by sending those emails out in the first place. So let's be really conscious of our own data and its contribution to the bigger crisis of emissions that are being created by our technology use. Number 5, let's get switched on to the environmental impact of technology, especially AI. I've always been an excited pants when it comes to the potential of technology and what it can do to lift people out of poverty and make lives better across the world. However, today, we are also counting the cost and impact of that same technology. We can't ignore what's going on. We can't allow technology to evolve at this point in time in the middle of climate acceleration, where we may have entered a new era for the Earth's climate if it is going to make this acceleration even faster. We're certainly going to wish we didn't do that down the track, that's for sure. Number 6, we need to address the societal impact of technology, including social media. And I haven't really addressed this so far because there's just so much that we could talk about, certainly when it comes to technology and e-waste. But one of my biggest issues with AI is the very same companies who created social media are the same companies behind AI. They have already shown us they lack the morality to address the enormous societal issues they created with social media. And we're now going to give them our support for AI development. We're not stupid, but sometimes I do wonder. These companies have created enormous social challenges and they haven't fixed any of them. So we can't expect them to do the right thing moving forward with AI. We really can't. We also need a new pricing model, one that moves away from advertising and towards subscriptions. So be willing to pay for the technology you use so we can help fix the problem. Although that's not a good thing for people in the developing world who don't have credit cards, who don't have the income. So we're going to have to sort of think about that in two different ways. But for those of us who can, pay for things so that we can get rid of the scourge of the advertising industry that we're all suffering from. But we also need to desperately address the misinformation and disinformation crisis we're already in, which is only going to get bigger with AI. So, just keep your eyes open. And number 7, I started this with 3 questions. So let's answer them. If it's not good for us, why are we accepting it? So the first question is that understanding of how entwined this sector is in our economies and in our lives. There is always risk in that, as we've seen with the fossil fuel industry, and it makes it very, very hard and challenging to break away from it. When we're so reliant on an industry and the risks for this industry are so great, especially in regards to the polycrisis, it could be setting us on the road to accelerated collapse. The second question was really looking in the eye, the risks technology poses to us, not just socially, politically, or with regards to security, but environmentally too. We get excited about all of the new things we can do and achieve, but what is the ultimate cost? Let's think this through for our children's and grandchildren's sake. And the final and probably most important one, we never seem to give ourselves the time to stop and ask the really important question, is the direction we're going with technology in our best interests as a collective species? If it is, great. But if it's not, or worse, it's great, but has real-time environmental risks, is it really all that great? We've seen over the last few years in reports, articles, podcasts, books, all talking about the devastating impact technology, specifically social media, is having on our kids, and we're not changing anything. Do we want to leave it as is, with youth suicide off the charts, sexual slavery rampant, pedophiles with access to all of this information? There's so many other issues. There's always negative sides to everything, I know that. But perhaps we've missed the fact that this is destroying the fabric of our societies, especially with social media. So it's time that we addressed it and did something about it. I hope you agree. It's a big, complex industry with big, complex issues. We need to look it in the eye, just like every other industry, and we need to look at what we can do individually, as well as what we need to do collectively to reduce the harm that we're doing on our planet. And from what I'm seeing, if we go hell-bent with artificial intelligence in particular, we're just going to accelerate the crisis that we're already in. And with e-waste, oh, God, we've got a mess to clean up. And we have to do it. And why are we still sitting here waiting for someone to step up and lead this? We're going to recycle less in the future, but we're going to create more. Come on, let's fix it. Thank you so much for joining me for part 8. We only got 2 more. As I head towards the end of this, we need a new middle class dreams series. I'm tackling definitely the more challenging and complex topics. This was definitely more intense as I was pulling it together. But I hope you value what I've shared here today and have perhaps learnt something new or can look at it from a new perspective. If I've been able to do that, then I've achieved something. If you're here with me, I just want to say I really appreciate it. I'm not getting all that many views on this series, which, makes it hard to keep going sometimes because it doesn't seem worth it. But I'm on a mission, as many people I know in this space are, and I know that what I'm sharing is important information to understand. But the other thing is the process of doing this is helping me to even better understand the bigger issues even more. And I believe that the more I can understand, the better I hope to be able to communicate about the solutions. So I'm benefiting from doing this personally and professionally. My brain is benefiting, I suppose. Please do share any videos that you think your community will value. I'd very much appreciate that. And I'd love to connect with you. So you can see here all of my different social media profiles. So come and connect, or you can join the Facebook group, 1 Billion People with Uncommon Courage. And let's come together to create a global community committed to action. Action is the only thing that's going to get us out of this. What we need is 1 billion people acting and driving change, because that can create the human tipping point we need. Once we reach 1 billion people, we only need each person to recruit 3 to 4 more people, and then we will have enough people to be in a position to drive the runaway changes required. We have to believe we can do it, and then we need to get to work. So I will see you for the next one, where we are going to discuss travel and tourism. And I am expecting some of you to hate me for this. But as I've said all throughout, we need to look this situation in the eye. We really, really do. We decide, or nature decides. Regardless, a decision will be made, and ultimately, nature will win. See you soon.